For decades, the auto industry has gotten used to minimal iterative changes with minimal disruption. In fact, even the Japanese revolution of the 1970s and 80s was really relatively minimal compared to what's happening today. Legacy auto is not prepared for it, Tesla is crushing them, and autonomy is going to be a big part of future disruption. Let's take a look. Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. This is actually part 2 of a 2-part series. I did the first part a couple of days ago. I'll leave a link to that up here and also at the end of this video if you want to watch that. It's not absolutely necessary to watch these in order, but I believe that this first part, which is a research note published by Morgan Stanley and Adam Jonas, is very critical to understanding why I'm going to make the argument that I'm going to make in this part today. Anyway, to set the stage, here's a super brief recap of that note. It's named In Defense of Robotaxis, and in it, Adam Jonas argues for the fact that we are pioneers right now. We are at the very, early stages of autonomous driving on the roads. It's going to be fraught with problems. Obviously it is. There are issues with it, but that it is inevitably going to take place over the coming years and especially decades, and that we will look back on this period of time as a pioneering time and a very important time, and that we all should be paying very, very close attention to the companies that are working the hardest to make this happen. So again, watch that entire video, especially if you disagree with what I'm talking about today, because a lot of it is based on that research note and of course a lot of other research and a lot of other videos that I've done over time. Okay, so in the intro, I talked about how even the Japanese invasion of the 1970s and 80s into the American and European markets is pretty minimal disruption compared to what's happening today. What do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is that the powertrain of Japanese automobiles, of course, was internal combustion engines. What they did is they manufactured the vehicles more efficiently, they made them safer, they made them cheaper to build, and then they passed that cost savings on to consumers so consumers could buy a very good car that was very inexpensive. Japanese auto manufacturers came in at the bottom and worked their way up. Of course, now they have luxury brands and all sorts of things like that, but they started at the bottom of the heap with inexpensive vehicles, went very mass market, and were able to manufacture vehicles at very large scales, good vehicles, not like fantastic, amazing performance vehicles, but just good, solid vehicles that the normal consumer could afford to purchase and therefore was happy to purchase it. And that, of course, was versus legacy auto like Chrysler and GM and Ford and other companies like that who were making kind of clunker cars at that time. They just didn't really care about their customer. They figured they had a monopoly. What did they care about it? Everything was fine. They would just go ahead manufacturing expensive but not very good vehicles, and the Japanese came in and undercut them. But that is relatively minimal disruption compared to what is happening today with the change of the powertrain from internal combustion engines to electric vehicles. And by the way, as a note, the global fleet of vehicles being sold, new vehicles being sold, just passed 13%, and that's globally. And the major milestone in the S adoption curve, when you're going from the very slow early adopters to the very rapid rise of the mainstream adopters, is about 10%. So globally, we've gone over that tipping point, and at that point, S curves are pretty much mathematically inevitable, which means that in some amount of time, we don't know exactly what that amount of time is, but I would guess by 2030 or the very early 2030s at the latest, we'll be looking at new vehicles sold, not the entire fleet, because it'll take a while to get rid of all the older cars, but of new vehicles sold, we're going to be looking at approximately 80% of new vehicles sold being electric vehicles. Battery electric vehicles specifically are what's going to be sold into the market. So that means that in 8 to 10 years at the maximum, we're going to be looking at a very small and shrinking subsegment of the new automobile sales being internal combustion engines. And that will tail off. Of course, there will be special use cases, people who will be willing to pay extra money and a bunch of other things in order to have internal combustion engine vehicles, because for whatever reason, they're the laggards. They're the same people who still have flip phones these days instead of having a smartphone. If you're like me and misinformation, I bet you feel like there aren't enough hours in the day. And while it's tough to find time to cook, we all want healthy, delicious meals. Well, Factor is the perfect solution. With Factor, you can forget that last-minute trip to the grocery store, the prepping and the cleanup, while still getting the flavor and nutritional quality you need. Factor's fresh, never frozen meals are ready in just 2 minutes, so all you have to do is heat and enjoy. And let me tell you, these are great meals, high quality ingredients, chef prepared to be delicious. Whether you've got special dietary needs, want to go low calorie, or even protein plus meals with 30 grams of protein or more, you can find delicious foods that fit your and your family's needs shipped right to your door and ready to eat in 2 minutes. I also really like that Factor offsets 100% of its delivery emissions and uses 100% renewable energy for production, so you can feel good about your food. Factor has amazing cold pressed juices too, with ingredients like apples, ginger, pineapple, and more. They're delicious and so nutritious. I love them. You can even level up your dining game with Gourmet Plus options, prepared to perfection by chefs and ready to eat in just 2 minutes. Treat yourself to premium ingredients like leeks, truffle butter, and asparagus. Head to factor75.com or click my link below and use the code Dr. Know-It-All to get 50% off your first Factor box. Thanks to Factor for sponsoring today's video. Be sure to go to factor75.com and use my code Dr. Know-It-All to get 50% off your first Factor box. And now let's get back to it. But at that point, the vast majority of vehicles will be electric vehicles, and that is a major disruption. That is something that has not happened since basically the introduction of the automobile. In the very, very early days, there was competition between electric vehicles and actually steam-powered vehicles and gasoline-powered vehicles. Gas-powered vehicles obviously won for various reasons about 100 years ago or so, about 110 years ago exactly. But anyway, those vehicles took over, and for that period of time, for about 100 years, they were just dominant, and everything that changed was iterative changing. The really, really big transformation that happened in the 19-teens and 20s, of course, was the Ford Model T, and that really took over because, of course, Henry Ford figured out how to mass manufacture vehicles and grew very, very rapidly. But since that time, we really haven't seen a major disruption to the powertrain of vehicles until now, and that is happening right at this moment. We are changing over from internal combustion to electric vehicles. If you watch this video in 10 years, if it's 2033 and you watch this video, you're going to be like, well, yeah, of course, we're all driving electric vehicles now. That'll be the kind of reaction that you'll have to this. Right now, I think a lot of people would be very surprised to hear this still. But, and here's more to the Morgan Stanley report, that's only one of the two major disruptions. The second major disruption that is happening, it's a little bit in the earlier stage, although Tesla is pushing it out, and I'm going to talk about that in just a second. But anyway, that transition is from human-driven vehicles to autonomously driven vehicles. I also predict, not by 2030, but sometime 2035, 2040, 2045, it's going to take time because we have to get human-driven vehicles off the road. But there will come a day somewhere in the decade and a half, 2-decade time from now that humans are not going to be allowed to drive on roads anymore. It's just going to be disallowed because it will be so dangerous. And that's really what Adam Jonas is talking about in his research note. He's like, if we look back on this from 2043 or 2045, we're going to see the 2020s as the pioneering, first steps in this. And just like you would not expect to get into an elevator and have to know how to operate that elevator to get yourself to the 25th floor or something. You just push a button and you go to the 25th floor. At that point in time, in the 2040s or so, I think safely by the 2040s, you will get in the car, you'll tell it where you want to go, and it will just go there, and you won't think anything about it. And you would be a little bit shocked to actually think about having to drive a vehicle. Just like you would be shocked if you got into an elevator and you saw a bunch of levers and things like that you had to pull, and doors you had to shut yourself and all that kind of stuff. You'd say, crap, I don't know what to do. I'd rather not do that. I'd rather just push a button. Can I just get into an elevator where it just does it for me automatically? You're going to get into a vehicle that will be autonomous, and you're going to say, please take me to the place I want to go. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to be responsible for potentially killing somebody. And of course, if the potential safety of these autonomous vehicles continues to grow, we're going to be, as Adam Jonas says, at the level of airline safety, not automobiles right now. Right now, tens of thousands of people just in the United States and more like 1 million people globally are killed by vehicles every single year. And that should come down drastically once most to all vehicles on roads are autonomous. Those vehicles, they're not going to get drunk. They're not going to get distracted. They're not going to be texting while they're driving. They're not going to be tired. They're not going to be yelling at the kids in the back seat. Whatever it is, they're going to have faster reaction time as well. So there will be many, many, many fewer accidents, and especially fatal accidents that are involved with these vehicles. This is just an inevitability. It doesn't matter whether it's Tesla or somebody else. Somebody is going to do this. And once that becomes the de facto standard, everybody is going to have to adopt it because they're going to have to rise to that bar of safety, or else people simply won't use them. So that level of safety, we don't expect to get into an airplane and have any, real significant danger of it crashing, especially in the Western world, you might say. There are still places in the world where I would not get on an airplane. I would not feel safe about it. Or if I do, then I'm like, I know I'm taking my chances. But anyway, if you get on, Delta or American or United, you might get delayed and you might have annoyances and stuff, but you really don't expect there to be the danger of you crashing and, having a fatality or something. It's very, very rare at this point. So that's the future we're headed to. And as you can see, Tesla is positioning itself very, very well. You can argue that Cruise and Waymo and other companies like that officially have driverless taxis driving around are more in advance of Tesla. I would argue technically that they are very much not. They're on rails. They're doing a very, very specific kind of task in a very specific geofenced area. But regardless of that, what I really want to talk about here is scale. Tesla has scale. Cruise and Waymo have a few hundred vehicles on the road. Tesla has millions, and they're at a run rate of about 2 million vehicles per year and growing. So a year from now, they'll have about 2 million more vehicles than they have on the road now. Another year hence, they'll have about 2.5 more million vehicles on the road than they do. And that will just continue to grow and grow until Tesla hits its target in, around 2030 or so of producing 20 million vehicles a year. So they're going to have a lot of vehicles on the road, which these other autonomous companies simply do not have. And this is where the two disruptive transitions, electric vehicles and autonomy, come together. They come together at Tesla to create a disruption that is going to bankrupt most legacy auto manufacturers. And the main reason for this is what Tesla is doing to pricing. If you look back again from about 1910 to like 2020 or so, that 110-year span, you look at a market where vehicles, internal combustion engine vehicles, or electric vehicles for that matter, had a steady state. They basically cost the same or a little bit more every single year. And a little bit more was tied to inflation. So you could make an argument that effectively the vehicle that was manufactured in 1915 is still effectively the same cost as the vehicle today. And you get a lot more for it, right? You get a much safer vehicle. You get one with a lot more amenities. It has a radio. It has all sorts of things. It has, anti-lock brake systems. It has a bunch of stuff that a Model T Ford wouldn't have had 110, 115 years ago. And that's fine. That's very, very cool. But the basic idea is that every year these things would go up in price, either around a little bit more, a little bit less than inflation. So they would just continue to rise with the cost of living that everything else costs. And of course, for a long time, we saw the same thing with Tesla. They were in their early days. It cost a lot of money. And then, of course, they introduced a less expensive car with the Model 3 and then the Model Y. So we had that. But then, of course, we had the early 2020s with the pandemic and with the chip shortage and all of that kind of stuff. And so Tesla pushed their prices up. And so we were like, oh, Tesla's doing the same thing as everybody else. Prices are going up. They're leveling off with inflation and the crazy things that are going on right now. But then the last, 6, 8, 9 months, what Tesla has been doing is slicing the prices off. I believe a Model Y, if I'm remembering correctly, was over $60,000. It was like $63,000 at the beginning of 2023. And now it's under $50,000. So we've had a massive reduction in price on the Tesla Model Y over just a period of 9 or 10 months. And it doesn't appear that Tesla has any intention of stopping at any point. They're going to continue slicing off the price of these vehicles until they hit a place where they can market clear. And they don't care if they make little to zero profit margin on these vehicles if they continue to sell them at scale. And this aggressive price reduction that is not sort of matching cost of living increases is something that legacy auto has never seen. And Tesla has an ace in the hole that allows them to do this. And of course, that ace in the hole is autonomy. So what we've got Tesla vehicles out there, including our new Model Y that we just purchased. And yeah, the cost went down after we purchased it by another $2,000 or something like that. But we purchased an inventory one, so it was basically the same cost as they are right now. So I don't feel too bad about that at all, especially because we got the red paint color, which is like a $2,000 extra. So anyway, it all sort of works out. But I expect that our car will be more expensive than in maybe another 6 months or something. Maybe Tesla will raise the price just a little bit and then lower it a little bit. But they're basically looking at how much do we have to charge for these vehicles in order to sell every single one that we manufacture? That's what they care about. They don't actually care about profit margin. They don't care about the exact cost of the vehicle, and they have incredible clarity. Again, because they're not selling to a dealership, they're selling directly to consumers. They know day to day and hour to hour, basically, whether people are buying their cars. If they raise the price by $500 and they see a big drop off in sales, they can then cut that price immediately within hours or days and reduce the price by $500 again. And then they can see the sales go back up again, or maybe they go too high and they suddenly realize that they're going to have a wait list. So they raise the prices. So anyway, they're able to, almost instantaneously and dynamically change the pricing of their vehicles. And for people who are used to, like, you buy like a Mazda CX-5 or something, and the 2024 Mazda CX-5 is $30,000, and that's what it is. And so you think like, oh, that's just the cost of the vehicle. Well, what happens is it's the dealership that's actually making that negotiation with you. So when you go to the dealership, if Mazda's like, we need to sell more of these cars, they can give the dealership incentives and say, yeah, we'll give you $1,500 or $2,000 off to the customer who comes in and purchases the car. Now, the dealership doesn't actually have to obey that. They can actually jack the price up, then give you the money off. So they can do shenanigans. But if you have a very, very honest dealership, they could pass that savings directly on to you, the customer. So in this scenario, the dealership is who is actually doing that balancing act of how much do I have to charge to market clear to get rid of my parking lot full of vehicles. But first of all, that's a big layer between manufacturer and customer, right? There's an internal customer there, which is the dealership, so that the manufacturers don't have a lot of clarity on how much customers are willing to pay. And then the second part is, because that dealership is there to maximize their profits, not to maximize the auto manufacturer's profits or to help the customer out, they're there for themselves, they will take advantage of any of these wiggle room situations and they'll charge more if they can. So you have this weird situation where you have three agents. You have the manufacturer, the dealership, and the customer, and they all have divergent, aims. They want to get different things out of it. And so that creates a lot of friction in the buying process, which of course, I'm sure many of you know. You don't like to go to a dealership, at least I certainly don't. I hate to get that feeling of I've been screwed over and I'm sitting there and they're pressuring me to get nitrogen filled tires and underbody carriage protection and whatever. And I'm like, gosh, I'm probably paying way too much for this stuff and just throwing my money away with these things. But they pressure you, right? So that sort of experience is very uncomfortable and unhappy. It's a much nicer experience just to go online and say, well, it's going to cost me $49,500 to buy this thing. Do I want it or not? Yes or no? You make a choice, right? It's an informed choice. You make it and you pay that amount of money. And then Tesla can like raise and lower those prices. So again, that gives Tesla a huge advantage. But the really, really big advantage here is that Tesla can actually shave their profit margin down to zero, or even potentially negative, a little bit negative, not a lot, but they could go potentially even a little bit negative in their net profit from hardware sales, because they don't ultimately care about that. All they care about is getting more vehicles into the market. And the reason why is because they're really, really placing their bets on autonomy. And when autonomy happens, it's not an if, it's a when. And you can argue about whether it's going to be next year or 2030 or something like that. But at some point, autonomy will happen. We will have autonomous vehicles. They will be allowed to drive, at least in certain areas. For example, San Francisco, where they already are allowed to drive. They will be allowed to drive on their own, with the customers not being responsible for the vehicle at that point. And of course, in order to enable that feature on a Tesla, you have to pay $12,000 right now, or $200 a month. So there is a revenue stream coming into Tesla right now, and it will grow substantially as the software gets better. And that revenue stream is like software margins. It's like on the order of 80% margins, as opposed to like 20% or 15% or something. So as Tesla gets better and better with full self-driving, and especially if they allow something like robo taxis, where I, as a consumer, can rent out my car and actually make money on the vehicle, then I'm very, very highly motivated to pay Tesla $200 or $300 or $400 a month or whatever it is to be part of that fleet, because I will make back more than that in renting it out and allowing it to drive around. So that sort of scenario is what Tesla is aiming for. So they don't really care that, the margins that they make on the hardware is really not that important, because a 15 or 20% margin is nothing compared to an 80% margin. And especially if it's a recurring one where you're doing like the $200 a month or something, or more if you want to rent it out as a robo-taxi, because I'm sure Tesla will not allow you to rent out the vehicle as a robo-taxi for $200 a month. You're going to have to pay more. And then hopefully they will grandfather in people who purchased it outright previously. But even if it's just for us as individual consumers like me, I certainly would be happy to pay a chunk of money, $200 a month, $300 a month, $12,000, whatever this number happens to be, in order to have the car officially drive me everywhere. It already almost does, but of course it's that little thing where I still have to be paying attention and I can't do anything else. So, it's useful. It's nice. It reduces my stress. It makes life better. I believe it makes me safer between me and the car. So it already has a great deal of value, and I'm not arguing against that. But once we sort of flip that switch and the vehicle itself is driving and I'm no longer responsible and I can sleep, or I can look on my laptop, or I can look on my phone and play games or get work done or write emails or whatever, at that point, there's a huge amount of actual economic value involved in being able to have autonomous driving, because, you could argue that I'll just sleep or something, and that has some value because it means I don't have to sleep at home. But let's say I just, get on my laptop and answer emails or something for my 20-minute commute to work, which is about what it takes me. That's 20 minutes of actual valuable economic time. I am generating value rather than sitting on my butt like this for 20 minutes, right? That is useless. I'm not generating any value except maybe to the old school gas station that I used to have to go to get filled up, or to the EV supercharger or something like that. So it's very, very minimal value that's created. It will be much more valuable if I can spend that 20 minutes or an hour driving into Atlanta or whatever that time is doing something useful rather than staring at the road. That is not a useful, economically productive type of activity. And so even if I chose not to rent my car out as a robo-taxi and just kept it for myself, there would still be economic value in having autonomy. And then, of course, and this is further down the line, eventually regulators will not allow humans to drive on the road anymore. Like I said, I think that's probably going to be 15 to 20 years from now. It's a while, because you have to get rid of pretty much all the cars that are on the road now and replace them with ones that can drive themselves. And that it takes a decade at least to have that happen. So we're looking at, 5 years to get good regulation and get data and have these cars be officially substantially better than humans and have all the regulation and stuff done. So let's say 2028 or something like that. And then another decade after that for most vehicles to be autonomous rather than human driven. So that part will take a while, but once that happens, that means that all of the older cars that are still around will not even be allowed on the roads anymore. And so then there will be an economic incentive, because people will have to buy an autonomous vehicle or just rent one, right? Just utilize one. And that's what probably will happen primarily over time, is that people will get rid of their current vehicle and just replace it by calling up the Tesla, Uber, whatever they're going to call it. Tuber? That sounds weird, like a potato or something. They'll call up Tuber, and that will drive them wherever they want to go, right? So unless they're going on a really big road trip, or they happen to have enough economic wealth in their family that they just want to own a car or something, most people, for most purposes, will probably just call a taxi because it'll be cheaper than owning a vehicle. So the way I think of Teslas right now is like a Trojan horse. They're like a Trojan car. It's that thing where the Greeks said, hey, we'll give you this gift of a horse as sort of a parting gift because we had this war and we want to make peace. And of course, they hid their army inside it. And then once the Trojans took it into the city of Troy, they all came out at night and they, basically destroyed the Trojans because they were inside the walls. And I believe what we're seeing right now is Tesla's doing that. That's again why they don't really care what their profit margins are. They just want to get the vehicles into consumers' hands, because hidden inside that vehicle is the little Greek soldiers, right? That's the hardware 3 and hardware 4 boards inside there, and the cameras and all of that stuff that operates. Those are like the little army that's inside there. And once that gets inside the walls of regulators and things like that, and collects data and all of the other good stuff that it does, and once it's inside the walls, there's nothing anybody can do to stop them. So that's what Tesla is going for right now. They are being super aggressive about pricing these things to sell as quickly as possible, to clear all their inventory. They don't care if they end up making 0% margins on the hardware, because that's not the important part for them. The important part is global dominance, and that's what they're going for. They have a Trojan horse coming in. Again, we're seeing this perfect storm of transition from internal combustion to electric vehicle plus compute and autonomy happening at the same time. It's a double disruption, and legacy auto is just not ready for it. They just can't work in that environment. They were built to work in a relatively static pricing environment, with prices either staying the same or going up, relatively speaking, with inflation over time. They're just not designed to make rapid changes and to reduce the cost of their vehicles. They're just not designed to do that. And so the biggest competition is, of course, going to be startups like Rivian and BYD and other Chinese companies, many other Chinese companies, those will be the dominant players in the 2030s. It's just inevitable that that's going to happen. If governments are smart, they will let the legacy auto manufacturers die. A lot of them, I think, are not going to be smart because people are going to cry about it. They're going to say this is going to destroy our economy and whatnot. And they'll say, please, government, bail us out yet again. And the government will, this is my prediction, the governments of many countries will bail these companies out. And then that will just be throwing away the money, right? It's useless because the company will just go bankrupt again. Nothing good will come of it. They will eventually, they might survive in name or selling a small number of vehicles or something, but they won't survive at the scale that they are right now because they're just not designed to do that. They have to, the best thing that could possibly happen is for them to die off as quickly as possible, get out of the way, and allow new companies to come in that are operating this new manner. And those companies will then take over the world, and that will be, they'll be the dominant players. So anyway, now you can probably see why I decided to make this a two-part video. I was originally going to do it in one, but that was just going to be so big. If I put the original note, the Morgan Stanley note, together with my opinion piece about this, I was like, this is too long. But anyway, if you haven't seen that, again, definitely check it out. I'll put it at the end of this video. And of course, let me know what you think about all of this. I'm very curious to know what you think. Maybe you violently disagree with me, and that's totally fine. Do it constructively. Don't be mean, no ad hominem attacks. But if you want to attack my ideas, definitely do so in the comments. While you're down there, if you did enjoy the video, or even if you didn't enjoy it but thought it was, thought-provoking and stuff, please do like the video. And if you want to see more content like this, please do subscribe to the channel. As always, a huge shout out to my patrons on Patreon, my YouTube channel members, and of course, my ex-subscribers. Thank you all so much for supporting the channel in any way that you can. And of course, if you want to join any of the teams, just check out the links in the description. And if you're interested in a whole bunch of really cool merch, check out our merch store. Link is in the description. We have TeslaBot t-shirts, the Tesla meme t-shirt, success is a possible outcome, 4680 battery cells. All of that stuff is on t-shirts, mugs, tumblers, and on and on. So check it out. And finally, thanks once again to Factor for sponsoring today's video. Be sure to check out my link in the description to get 50% off your first box of Factor, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.